Hello everyone, welcome to Dinesh QL. My name is Dinesh Priyankara, Data Platform MVP and IT Consultant. Do you know that Microsoft Fabric creates a warehouse automatically whenever you create a lakehouse? Yes, so you get a default data warehouse whenever you create a lakehouse. So let's try to understand what is this default data warehouse, how it is getting created, what sort of support we have to give for Microsoft Fabric, and what is this SQL endpoints. And there's another thing called default dataset. How we're going to make sure that default dataset is available for Power BI. Not only that, since this is a data warehouse, we should be able to create views and SPs. So let's talk about all of these things with this video. So what is this default data warehouse? So that's what we see as SQL Endpoint for Lakehouse. Whenever you create a Lakehouse, Microsoft Fabric creates a warehouse automatically. You don't need to specifically create it, it happens automatically. But it doesn't mean that all the files you have placed or the tables you have formed in your lakehouse are going to be shown as tables in your warehouse. In order to see tables in a warehouse, first thing, you need to make sure that you create tables as delta tables. That's the first thing. Second thing is you need to make sure that delta tables are created in tables folder. If you have created lakehouses, you know that it has two main folders, files and tables. So if you have created tables in files folder, you're not going to see those tables as a part of your data warehouse. But if you have created tables in tables folder, then you'll be seeing those tables as part of your warehouse tables. Okay, so just make sure that you create tables in tables folder if you want to show those tables as a part of your data warehouse. These tables can be used for forming the data set. So every lakehouse has a default Power BI dataset. So that Power BI dataset is formed based on your default warehouse. So if you're familiar with Power BI dataset, you know that you can simply extract data and then form tables. But it is your duty to make sure that relationships are created. So it is same with Microsoft Fabric as well. You need to make sure you form the dataset properly. You might be considering something like star schema. So in that case, you will be forming one table as a fact table and then multiple tables as dimensions. But you need to go to the model and see whether all the relationships have been created. If not, you have to create these relationships. Then only it properly form the data set, and that can be used as the Power BI data set. You can simply open Power BI in Microsoft Fabric and connect with the data set and create reports. All right. Now, how do I really use it? If you are familiar with an architecture called medallion architecture, which means you are familiar with segments or the layers like bronze, silver, gold. Okay, you extract data and then initially place them in the bronze, and then you process, you perform some transformations, you perform some validation, and then move or the save the output in silver layer. Okay, and then you try to enrich the data in the silver layer and then place the output again in another layer called gold. So that's what we do with the medallion architecture. You can simply consider the lakehouse warehouse as a layer like silver, layer like gold. So that's what we have been doing with things like data lake. All right, and whenever you use Synapse or Databricks, we maintain sections or the layers like that. So you can simply create a single lakehouse that represents the gold layer, and then you can form tables based on the business requirement, and then those tables can be simply accessed through the default warehouse or default Power BI dataset. This is how you use the default warehouse. Let me take you through an illustration that shows how these tables are formed. So let's say we have a lakehouse. So the name of the lakehouse is Lakehouse A, and we have another lakehouse which is Lakehouse B. So as you see, Lakehouse A has set of files, subfolders, folders, and it has tables as well. But let's focus on Lakehouse B. So Lakehouse B has set of files, folders, okay, or the subfolders, and it has no tables. But we know that whenever we create a lakehouse, Microsoft Fabric creates a warehouse for you. So this is the warehouse for Lakehouse B. So I have named it as Data Warehouse B or the Warehouse B. All right. Now, how are we going to make sure that Warehouse B shows tables? One way of creating tables for Warehouse B is use existing files in my Lakehouse B and form delta tables based on those files. So that can be easily done through the GUI. I'll be showing as a part of the demo. So let's say we use the specific set of files, let's say the blue color files, for forming tables. So as soon as tables are created, those tables will be available as a part of Warehouse B. So that's one way of getting tables created for Warehouse B. If you have watched my One Lake video, I showed the way of creating shortcuts for files. Just like the way of creating shortcuts for files, we can create shortcuts for tables as well. So I can simply create a shortcut for Lakehouse A tables in my Lakehouse B. So which means I'll be seeing tables in my Lakehouse B, and those tables will be again shown with my Warehouse B. All right. So that's another way of getting tables into Warehouse B. Third one, think about some data processing. So I can use a notebook for processing data. Let's say I access some files in my files folder and then process and save the output as delta tables. But remember, saving has to be done with tables folder, not with files folder. So whenever I save delta tables in my tables folder, those tables will be available for Warehouse. Okay, so I'll be seeing that in my Warehouse B as well. Next thing, pipelines. So if I'm creating a pipeline for accessing a couple of sources and then getting data and do some processing and finally save it in my Lakehouse B, it will be saved as delta tables, and those tables will be available in my Warehouse. So this is how default Warehouse shows tables. Okay, so if I have created tables in files, no, I'm not going to see those tables in Warehouse B. So if you go and open SQL Endpoint, or if you go and open Warehouse, you'll be seeing some components that are related to the Warehouse. Models, views, SP, securities. It is not exactly a SQL database or Synapse dedicated SQL pool. You'll be seeing things you have seen with standard data warehouses. It's not only that, you'll be seeing something called model. That's the default Power BI dataset. So it's your duty to open it and then organize tables and create relationships. So once everything is created, that can be open for applications and users. So the model will be open as the default dataset for Lakehouse B, and the users can access either the data warehouse directly or the default dataset. For example, if I want to access my warehouse, I can simply use something like Management Studio and connect with it, and then work with my tables. Or else, if I want to create some reports, dashboards, or perform some analytics, I can use Power BI, and then I can connect to the default Power BI dataset, which is the data warehouse, and then create reports and dashboards. So this is how we see the warehouse. This is how tables are formed, and this is how we access the warehouse for performing experiments and analytics. Now let's have a look on all of these things. So let me show you the way of creating tables from files and creating tables using shortcuts and notebook, pipelines, and let's go through views and stored procedures and see. All right, I have opened my Microsoft Fabric environment. So as you see, I have already created a Lakehouse called Lakehouse 22. And I have a folder called customer. If I click on the customer folder, you can see a customer CSV file has been already uploaded, and two shortcuts. Sales shortcut is a shortcut created for another Lakehouse. So that Lakehouse has set of sales files. And the sales territory shortcut is based on Azure Data Lakes 2. Okay. Now this Lakehouse has a SQL endpoint. So as you know, whenever we create a Lakehouse, Microsoft Fabric creates a warehouse for us. So that is the SQL endpoint. So I can go to my workspace and I can scroll down and see my Lakehouse. So this is my Lakehouse, and this is a SQL endpoint that has been created. So let me open it in a different window. So this is the warehouse. So it is just like a normal database. You can see schemas like DBO, guest, and if you expand security node, you can see database roles. In addition to that, you see a section for storing your queries. But if I click on DBO, I don't see anything. The reason is we have not created anything yet. Okay, so let me go back to my Lakehouse and let me create a table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the CSV file, a customer CSV file, and then say load to table. So this creates a table in my table section. So I'm going to name it as customer, confirm, it is getting created. Table is created. So I can see my table here. We can go to the warehouse and see, but let's create all the tables and then have a look on the warehouse. Let's try to access a table in another Lakehouse and then have it in Lakehouse 22. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the ellipsis button next to tables and then say new shortcut. I'm going to create a shortcut based on Microsoft OneLake. I'm going to select 21. Click on next, expand tables. I can see two tables, so I'm going to select product file. If I click on it, I should see the log file, the data log file, and some Parquet files, so which means a data table, and I'm going to click on create. So this creates a shortcut for 21 Lakehouse, okay, and table will be appeared in my 22 Lakehouse. All right, so now we have two tables. One is based on a file we have in files folder and another table from a different Lakehouse. I can do the same for these shortcuts as well. For example, I can click on sales territory, which is a shortcut created against Azure Data Lake Store. I can simply say load to tables for sales territory. So if I confirm it, it will create a table. Even though I don't have files with me, it can create the table for those files in Azure Data Lake Store, and we'll be seeing those tables in the warehouse. Okay, so we have now 3 tables. Let me quickly open Notebook and then we'll try to process this sales folder or all these sales files and then try to create a sales table in tables folder. I've already written the code. Let me click on open notebook drop down and say new notebook. Okay, this is the code I'm going to use for creating sales table based on my sales files. So as you see, I create a schema. I'm adding columns like date ID, product ID, customer, territory, sales amount, and sales quality. These are the values I get from my CSV file. So I create a schema and then I apply that schema for my data frame. So this is how I create my data frame, spark.read.format CSV, and I load all the CSV file from my sales folder, apply the schema. I simply say no header, and then at the end of this code, I get the data loaded to my data frame. I'm adding a new column called sales date because date ID is a value with this format. I really need a column with date value. So I'm creating a new column called sales date. You can see I use a function called toDate to convert this date ID to a date. All right. So at the end, I have the data set that can be used for creating my table. So I'm going to run this cell. Okay, now we can see the result. Let me scroll down and see the columns. So these are the columns coming from CSV file, date ID, product ID, and all other columns. And this is the one I added, sales date, based on the date ID column. Okay, now we have the data frame. Now let's add a new code for saving this result as a table. Okay, so as you see, I'm creating a variable called OneLakePath, and it has just a tables, all right? And all I had to do is just write. So data frame.write, and the format has to be mentioned as delta, and header, since we have applied the schema, we have header names. So I can simply say header is true, and if it is available, I can say, it should be overwritten, and that's all. So I can say OneLakePath and sales. So this will create a table called sales. Let me run it. I can see my sales table. So let me go to the next tab and see the warehouse, and let me refresh this. I can see all my tables. So I should be able to query these tables, and I should be able to create other components like views, SPs based on these tables. Let me show you the way of getting a table created based on pipeline as well. But since this is preview, certain things are not working as we expected. So I have no way of completing the process, but let me show you. Let me go back to my Lakehouse, and if I click on get data, I can see a new data pipeline. So when I click on it, it opens a wizard which can be used for connecting with the source and then get the data into the Lakehouse. I can name the pipeline, let me say 22, create. So this is how Wizard works. You can see, you can select the data source. There are sample data as well, but if I scroll down, I can see a lot of connectors. I can simply use the connector related to my data source and connect with it. And then I can define the destination and finally get the data loaded to my Lakehouse. I'm not going to continue with this wizard because time it gives me some issues. But this is how you get the data through pipelines. So once you have the right version, yes, you can use the use pipelines for connecting with sources and then get the data into your Lakehouse and form tables. All right. So I'm not going to continue. Let me close it. Now let's have a look on our data warehouse again. So if I go back to my Lakehouse, I can see tables and folders. And you know that I have already opened my warehouse with the other tab. But if you see this drop down at the top right corner, I can expand it and I can simply switch to my SQL endpoint, which means I can open the warehouse without going to my second tab. Let me click on this. So it will open my warehouse. All right, let's have a look on the items in this warehouse. So I can see tables. I can click on the table name and get the data loaded to my right pane. Okay. In addition to that, you can see views, right, and stored procedures and functions. Now I can see a section called My Queries. If I click on My Queries, I don't have anything yet, but I can simply click on this query for creating queries. So as you see, there are three tabs: data, query, and the model. So if I click on query, I should see a query window and I can write some codes. Let me create a view. I have already written a query, so let me copy and paste it. So this is the query. So as you see, I'm accessing the sales table and then I join the other table like customer, product, files, and sales territory, and then forming, grouping, and aggregation. So it's a very simple query, but what I do is I create a view. Okay, I create a view called sales summary. Let me run it and see whether it works. Okay, so all good. Let me expand views and see. I might have to refresh. Yes, I can see the view. Okay, let me create the view and see whether it works. I'm going to say select all from my view. I can drag the sales summary object to my query window. Yeah. So it works. You might experience some issues whenever you work with views and stored procedures. It's all because of this is still preview, but you can test it and see. So if I want to create a stored procedure, just like the way you have been creating stored procedure with your SQL databases, I can simply say create proc and then dbo dot. For example, I can say get sales. I can have parameters. Let's say something like year int as begin and end. So let's say select all from sales table. Let me drag and drop sales object, and I'm going to say where year of sales date equal my year parameter. Should be sales date. All right, let me run it and see. Okay, procedure is created, and I'll see whether I can execute the stored procedure. Yes, it worked. All right. So this is how you enhance your warehouse or the default warehouse. Now let's have a look on the model, because that's going to be your default Power BI dataset. Let me click on the model. So I should be able to see all my tables, but as you see, relationships have not been created. So it's my duty to create relationships. Let me organize my tables. All right, let me create a relationship. So customer ID to customer key. Cardinality is correct, so I'm going to confirm it. So I can see one-to-many relationship, and I'm going to do it for the product as well, and then sales territory. All right, so I have created the model. If you open this model through Power BI, you'll be able to access this model and then create your visuals. Okay, so accessing this data warehouse using something like Management Studio, Power BI, and then work with it. I'm going to make another video on it. All right, but this video is all about showing you the way of getting warehouse tables form and then enhancing your warehouse by adding views, stored procedures, and things like that. All right, now you know how the default warehouse is getting created and what are the things you have to do in order to show your data sets as tables in your data warehouse. So if you have any question on this, please add them as comments. I'll make sure that you have the reply. And let's see how we can access the data warehouse using something like Management Studio and Power BI next video. Thanks for watching.